The galaxy was in chaos. The once powerful empire of the Drakari was teetering on the edge of collapse. For centuries, the Drakari had ruled over many worlds with their advanced technology and unmatched strength. Their queen, Zeralia, was the symbol of that power. But now, she was on the run. Her ship had been attacked by the Vordok Empire, a brutal enemy who had long desired the downfall of the Drakari. The attack had been swift, and Zeralia's ship was left in ruins, drifting in the darkness of space. She barely managed to escape, but in the process, she was severely injured. Her escape pod had crash-landed on a primitive planet called Earth. The Vordok were relentless. Their king, Velros, believed that capturing the queen would mark the end of the Drakari. He sent his forces to Earth determined to find and kill Zeralia. He didn't know that Earth was a far more dangerous place than he could ever imagine. The humans, simple as they seemed, had a strength the Vordok had never accounted for. Meanwhile, on Earth, a man named Jacob was going about his usual day. He was a farmer, living in a quiet village far from the busy cities. His life was simple, his days filled with working the land, caring for his animals, and occasionally spending time with his family. He had heard of strange things happening in the world, but never did he think he would find himself at the center of an intergalactic conflict. Jacob was returning from the market when he stumbled upon the wreckage. It wasn't a plane crash or any earthly disaster. No, this was something different. The remains of a ship, twisted and burned, were scattered across the ground. Jacob's curiosity got the better of him, and he approached cautiously. As he neared the wreckage, he heard a faint sound. Someone was alive. He rushed to the wreckage, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment he saw her, he froze. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin had an otherworldly glow to it, and her eyes were a deep, shimmering silver. Her clothes, torn and burned from the crash, seemed to shimmer with an energy that Jacob couldn't understand. She was beautiful, but she was also vulnerable, lying motionless among the wreckage. Jacob didn't know who or what she was, but something deep inside him told him he had to help her. Without thinking, he carefully lifted her into his arms and began carrying her back to his small cabin. He had no idea what kind of danger he was bringing into his life, but he couldn't leave her there to die. At his cabin, Jacob laid her down on his bed and rushed to gather water and cloths to tend to her wounds. He was no doctor, but he knew enough about first aid to do what he could. He cleaned the burns and cuts, carefully trying to bring her back to consciousness. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder who she was. The ship had been unlike anything he had ever seen, and her appearance seemed almost otherworldly. Hours passed, and the woman finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she let out a soft gasp as she looked around, confused and frightened. When her gaze met Jacob's, she froze. There was a moment of silence before she spoke, her voice soft but commanding. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "My name is Jacob," he said, his voice calm but unsure. "I found you in the wreckage. You were injured. I brought you here to help." Her gaze softened a little, but there was still a wariness in her eyes. She seemed to be taking in everything around her, her sharp gaze scanning the cabin and then settling back on him. "You should not have done this," she said, her voice low and serious. "You have no idea what you've involved yourself in." Jacob didn't understand. He was just a simple farmer. He didn't know about wars between empires or the politics of distant galaxies. All he knew was that he couldn't just leave someone to die, no matter who they were. "I couldn't just leave you out there," he said softly. "What happened to you?" The woman hesitated for a moment, then let out a quiet sigh. "My name is Zeralia," she said. "I am the queen of the Drakari Empire." Jacob's eyes widened. "The Drakari?" He had heard of them, though he knew little about them. From what he gathered, they were a race of powerful, technologically advanced beings. But why would a queen of such an empire crash on Earth? "I don't understand," Jacob said, his brow furrowing. "What are you doing here? Why did you crash?" Zeralia closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering her strength. "I was attacked," she explained, her voice tinged with frustration. "The Vordok, a rival empire, ambushed my ship. They're determined to destroy my people, and I was their target. I managed to escape, but my ship was destroyed, and I ended up here." Jacob's mind was spinning. He had no idea what any of that meant, but it didn't sound good. He had already risked so much by bringing her here. What if the Vordok found her? What if they were already searching for her on Earth? Zeralia seemed to sense his growing concern. "You have no reason to help me," she said, her voice colder. "Now. You are a primitive human, and this war is not yours to fight. You should leave. Go back to your life, and forget you ever saw me." Jacob looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "I can't just turn my back on you. You're hurt, and I won't let anyone hurt you." Zeralia stared at him for a long moment, as if considering his words. There was something about this human, something in his eyes that made her pause. Despite his lack of advanced technology or combat skills, he had shown a strength and compassion that most beings in the galaxy would never understand. But she was the queen of the Drakari, and the survival of her people rested on her shoulders. If she stayed on Earth, she could be a target for the Vordok. The thought of putting this human in danger because of her was almost unbearable. Still, she knew she couldn't just leave. "I cannot stay here," Zeralia said at last, her voice filled with resolve. "The Vordok will be looking for me. They will destroy this world to find me. You have to let me go." Jacob shook his head. "I can't just let you walk away. You're not alone anymore." Zeralia looked at him, studying his face carefully. There was no fear in his eyes, only determination. She had heard of humans, foolish, weak creatures that could easily be crushed by superior forces. Yet here was a human who had risked everything for her. She knew that he didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation, but his bravery was undeniable. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. Jacob's simple act of kindness had changed everything. He had no idea how much danger he was in now. And yet, despite it all, he was willing to help a stranger, an alien queen, simply because it was the right thing to do. Zeralia closed her eyes for a moment, realizing that there was no easy solution to this. She had to make a decision, but that decision would affect not just her fate, but the future of Earth, and possibly the entire galaxy. As the queen of the Drakari, she could no longer see this as just her battle. This would now be their fight, and it was a fight they would face together. But first, she needed to trust Jacob. She needed to believe that, despite their differences, they could work together to survive. She looked at him again, her gaze softer now. "I don't know what this will mean for you, Jacob," she said quietly, "but I will need your help. The Vordok will not stop until they have me." Jacob nodded firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. You're safe here for now." Zeralia looked at him with a mix of gratitude and sadness. She didn't know how long she could stay hidden on this planet, but for the moment she would place her trust in this human. "I will hold you to that promise," she said, her voice filled with the weight of their uncertain future. Jacob's cabin, small and simple, felt safer now that Zeralia was recovering. The walls were made of rough wooden beams, and the only luxuries in his home were the small things: a hand-carved chair, a fire that crackled in the corner, and the humble meals he prepared. It was nothing special, but for the moment, it was a sanctuary, a place where Zeralia could rest, away from the chaos she had fled. Every day, Jacob kept watch over her. He tended to her wounds, fed her what little he could offer, and made sure She was comfortable. Zeralia's healing was slow, but she was strong. Despite the pain from the injuries she had sustained in the crash, she began to regain her energy. With each passing day, she seemed to become more and more aware of the human world around her. At first, Jacob had simply tried to keep her comfortable, but now he found himself learning from her. Zeralia spoke of her people, the Dracari, and their rich history. She explained their advanced technology, their noble ways, and how they had ruled the galaxy with wisdom and strength. Yet there was sadness in her voice as she spoke of the fall of her empire. Jacob listened carefully, his heart heavy with understanding. He had never thought much about politics or space wars, but now, as he heard her story, he realized how little he truly knew about the universe. He had always been focused on his life here on Earth, where things were simple and quiet. But this alien woman had opened his eyes to a much larger world, one that was full of danger and fear. Despite her otherworldly beauty and regal presence, Zeralia wasn't like the stories Jacob had heard. She wasn't some distant queen, cold and distant, but someone who had seen the horrors of war firsthand. He saw the sadness in her eyes and understood that her pride, her strength, had been tested beyond anything he could imagine. She wasn't just a queen of a great empire. She was a survivor. As the days passed, Jacob grew increasingly curious about the world she came from. He wanted to know more, to understand what had happened to her people. He asked questions, and Zeralia answered, though sometimes with a weary tone. The Vordok. They were once our allies, she explained one evening as they sat by the fire. But greed and power changed them. They turned on us, seeking to claim what was ours. Jacob nodded, understanding the pain in her voice. So now, you're the last of your people? Not the last, she corrected him, but close enough. Many of my people have been scattered across the galaxy. Some are dead, some are hiding like I am. Her words were heavy, and Jacob couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for her. He had never known a world like hers, one filled with constant conflict and fear. In his world, peace was something that came naturally, and the worst thing he had to worry about was a poor harvest or a broken fence. Yet despite the hardship Zeralia had faced, there was still something fierce within her. Even in the darkest moments, she never seemed to lose her spirit. Jacob admired that. It made him want to help her, even though he didn't know how. His skills were limited to farming, not fighting, and certainly not saving a queen from an intergalactic war. Days turned into weeks, and during that time, Zeralia's strength grew. The fire in her eyes slowly returned, and she began to take more interest in her surroundings. One morning, she approached Jacob while he was out tending to his garden. "You've been very patient with me," she said softly, her voice a little stronger than before. "But we can't stay here forever." Jacob looked up from the plants he was tending, his brow furrowed in concern. "What do you mean?" Zeralia's gaze was serious. "I need to find my people. I need to warn them of the Vordok and the threat they pose. But if we stay here, I'll only put you in danger. The Vordok will never stop searching for me. They have resources beyond your comprehension." Jacob stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "But we don't know where they are, do we? You're safe here for now." Zeralia shook her head, her expression hardening. "The Vordok are relentless. They won't give up even if I hide here for 100 years. I've already cost you so much. I can't ask you to keep hiding me forever." Jacob felt a pang of guilt. He had grown fond of her, and he didn't want to see her leave, especially not if it meant risking her life again. But he also understood the truth of her words. They couldn't stay hidden forever. The Vordok would find them eventually. "I can't help you fight them," Jacob said, his voice quiet. "But I'll help you however I can. If you need to leave, I'll help you find a way." Zeralia studied him carefully. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind blew softly through the trees, and Jacob could hear the distant calls of birds. It was a peaceful scene, a stark contrast to the war. Zerelia was running from... "I don't want to leave you," Zerelia admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I have no choice." Jacob placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "Then we'll figure it out together. I may not have your skills, but I know this land. I can help you find a safe place." She looked at him, and for the first time, a soft smile tugged at her lips. "You are more resourceful than you know, Jacob." The next few days were spent planning. Jacob didn't have the advanced technology that Zerelia was used to, but he had his knowledge of Earth. He knew the land, the forests, the rivers, and the mountains. He could help her escape without being tracked, at least for a while. They discussed the safest routes, the places where they could hide. Zerelia explained more about her people, the Drakari, and the vast distances between the stars. She spoke of the ways they communicated, how they could travel light years in the blink of an eye. Jacob couldn't even begin to understand the complexities of intergalactic travel, but he knew one thing for sure. If Zerelia was going to find her people, it wouldn't be easy. "I don't have much to offer," Zerelia said one evening as they sat around a small campfire. "But I want you to know that I won't forget this. I will repay you for your kindness when I can." Jacob smiled at her. "You don't owe me anything. I'm just doing what anyone would do." Zerelia looked at him, her eyes softening. "Not everyone would do what you've done, Jacob. I've learned that, and for that, I will always be grateful." Their bond was growing stronger. Though they were from different worlds, their shared experiences had brought them closer. Zerelia had come to trust Jacob more than anyone else she had ever known. In turn, Jacob had started to believe in something bigger than his small, quiet life. He had become part of a story much larger than he could have ever imagined. The next day, Zerelia was ready to leave. Jacob helped her gather what little supplies they could carry. They couldn't afford to take much, just enough to survive on the journey. As they prepared to leave, Jacob felt a strange sense of dread. He knew they were walking into the unknown. But he also knew that Zerelia wasn't just some queen who needed saving. She was someone who had survived the unthinkable and who had chosen to fight back. "Are you ready?" Jacob asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Zerelia nodded. "I have no other choice." Jacob and Zerelia had been traveling for days, moving through forests, crossing rivers, and avoiding any signs of the Vordok. Jacob knew the land well, but there was a growing sense of unease in the air. Despite his best efforts, the risk of being found by the Vordok was always there. Still, he didn't hesitate. Zerelia needed him, and he wasn't going to back down. As they walked, Zerelia had grown quieter. Jacob noticed the change in her. She was still strong, but the sadness in her eyes seemed deeper now. It was as if the weight of her past was finally catching up with her, and Jacob could feel it too. He had learned a lot about her over the past few days. She had told him about her empire, the Drakari, and their rich history. He had heard her talk about their advanced technology, their powerful fleets, and their once great reign over the galaxy. But there was more to her story, and Jacob could sense it. She had been holding something back. One night, as they made camp by a small creek, Jacob decided to ask. He had never been one to pry, but he felt like it was time to understand the full truth. "Zerelia," Jacob began as he stoked the fire, "I know you've been through a lot, but there's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" Zerelia looked at him, her silver eyes reflecting the firelight. She was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. Jacob didn't push her. He knew that whatever it wasn't easy for her to share. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "There's something about the Drakari that I haven't told you, something that could change everything." Jacob sat down next to her, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean? You've already told me about your people, about the war with the Vordok." Zerelia shook her head slowly. "It's not just about the war. It's about who we really are. The Drakari aren't just a species. We're different. We've been around for much longer than anyone realizes. We have a power that most civilizations don't understand. It's something that was passed down to us through generations." Jacob frowned, trying to follow her words. "What kind of power?" Zerelia met his gaze, her expression serious. "The Drakari have the ability to manipulate the energy of the universe. We can shape the very fabric of reality itself. We were once able to control the stars, bend time, and travel through dimensions. But we lost it. Over time, we forgot how to harness that power, and our enemies took advantage of our weakness." Jacob was stunned. He had heard of many great civilizations and their technologies, but what Zerelia was describing sounded more like a myth than reality. "You mean you can, change the universe?" Zerelia nodded, her eyes distant as if recalling a time long past. "Yes, the power is in our blood, in our essence. It's what made the Drakari so powerful. But when the Vordok attacked us, they knew about this power. They feared it, and they sought to destroy it. That's why they want me dead. They believe that if they kill me, they can wipe out the last remaining link to that power." Jacob sat back, trying to process everything she had just said. "So the Vordok don't just want your people to fall, they want to erase your history, your entire civilization?" Zerelia nodded again, her voice growing softer. "Yes. They want to rewrite history. They want to make sure that no one can ever reclaim the power we once had. They've been hunting down every Drakari they can find, trying to eliminate the last remnants of our kind." Jacob could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of her past pressing down on her. She wasn't just a queen, she was the last hope of her people. And she had been carrying that burden alone for so long. "We can't let them win," Jacob said, his voice firm. He had made up his mind. "I won't let them destroy you or your people. We'll find a way to stop them." Zerelia looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "You don't understand. Even if we defeat the Vordok, the power I have, it comes with a cost. It's not just about protecting my people. It's about controlling something that could destroy everything." Jacob frowned. "What do you mean? What kind of cost?" Zerelia sighed, her expression troubled. "The power of the Drakari was never meant to be used for personal gain. It's a force of nature, and if it's not controlled, it can destroy entire worlds. I've seen it happen. Our ancestors used it recklessly, and it led to the downfall of our empire. If I try to tap into that power again, I might not be able to control it. I could become something dangerous." Jacob reached out, placing a hand on hers. "You don't have to do it alone, Zerelia. We'll figure it out together. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself." Zerelia looked down at his hand, then back at him. For a moment she said nothing, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes. She was torn. Part of her wanted to believe him, to trust that together they could overcome the impossible. But another part of her feared what might happen if she lost control. "I wish it were that simple," she said quietly. "But the power is in me, and once it's unleashed, there's no turning back." Jacob squeezed her hand. "Then let's make sure we're ready when the time comes. We'll face whatever happens together." Zerelia looked at him, her gaze softening. She had never expected to find someone like Jacob, someone so willing to stand by her side, even when the odds seemed impossible. She had known many people in her life, but none of them had shown the same kind of courage and selflessness that Jacob did. She didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to stop the Vordok and save her people. Maybe, with Jacob by her side, she could learn to control the power inside her without destroying everything. The next morning, they packed up and continued their journey. They didn't know where they were headed, only that they had to keep moving. The Vordok were still hunting her, and they couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. Jacob and Zerelia had become a team, each relying on the other in ways they hadn't expected. As they walked, Zerelia began to share more stories about her people, their history, their triumphs, and their mistakes. She spoke of the Drakari's once great civilization, of the magnificent cities they built and the knowledge they had accumulated over thousands of years. She also spoke of the darker side of their past, the wars, the betrayals, and the loss of their greatest power. Jacob listened intently, realizing just how much he didn't know about the universe. But one thing was becoming clear. He was no longer just a simple farmer. He was part of something much bigger, something that could change the course of history. Jacob and Zerelia had been on the move for weeks. Their journey had taken them through dense forests, across sprawling plains, and into mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Despite the long days and nights, they never stopped. There was no time for rest. Zerelia had made it clear that the longer they stayed in one place, the more dangerous it became. The Vordok would find them, and when they did, there would be no escaping. Jacob had been doing his best to keep them hidden. He used his knowledge of the land, finding secret paths through the wilderness, leading them to caves and secluded areas where no one could easily find them. But even with all his effort, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Vordok had a vast network of spies, and Jacob knew they were closing in. Zerelia, though still recovering from her injuries, had grown stronger. Her healing had been slow, but her powers were starting to return. Jacob didn't fully understand what she was capable of, but he could feel the energy around her. There were moments when she would seem to glow with an otherworldly light, and her eyes would shift in ways that made Jacob's heart race. He was beginning to see the weight of what she carried, the power that had once been used to shape the universe. It was both a blessing and a curse. One afternoon, as they were traveling through a dense forest, they heard the sound of engines in the distance. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He knew that sound. It was the unmistakable hum of Vordok, ships fast, powerful, and deadly. They were close. Zerelia's face turned pale as she heard it too. She quickly grabbed Jacob's arm. "We need to hide," she whispered urgently. "Now!" Jacob didn't hesitate. He pulled her off the trail and into the thick underbrush. The forest was dense, and he hoped it would be enough to keep them out of sight. They crouched behind a large tree, listening intently. The sound of the ships grew louder, and then, just as quickly, it faded. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. Had they passed? Were they still searching for them? Zerelia's hand tightened around his. "They're looking for us," she said softly. "But they won't give up easily. They'll search every inch of this forest if they have to." Jacob's mind raced. What were they going to do? They couldn't just keep running forever. The Vordok were too powerful, and Jacob knew that sooner or later they would catch up. "We can't outrun them forever," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "There has to be another way. A way to stop them." Zerelia turned to him, her expression determined. "There is," she said quietly, "but it comes at a price." Jacob frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Zerelia took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she thought about her next words carefully. "I told you that the Drakari have great power. We can manipulate the very fabric of reality, but it's not something that can be done lightly. It requires a great sacrifice." Jacob's heart began to race. "What kind of sacrifice?" Zerelia looked away, as if she couldn't bear to meet his gaze. "Using the power of the Drakari is dangerous. It takes more than just energy. It takes life. It takes everything you are. Jacob was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. So you're saying, to stop them, you would have to give up your life? Zerelia nodded, her voice soft but resolute. It's the only way. The Vordok will never stop hunting me unless I use my power to destroy them. But I cannot do it without risking everything I have. And if I lose control... She trailed off, her eyes dark with the memory of past mistakes. Jacob shook his head, his heart heavy with the thought. You don't have to do that. I won't let you. Zerelia's gaze softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes. You don't understand. This power is what has made the Drakari great, and it's also what has led to our downfall. If I don't use it now, everything we've fought for will be lost. The Vordok will win, and the galaxy will fall into darkness. Jacob took her hands in his, squeezing them gently. I don't care about any of that. I care about you. You don't have to make that sacrifice. We'll find another way. Zerelia looked at him, her expression softening. I wish it were that simple, but I can't just run forever. We can't keep hiding. Before Jacob could respond, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. Their moment of calm was shattered. The Vordok were getting closer. We have to go, Zerelia said urgently. She stood up, pulling Jacob to his feet. They're close! Jacob's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them now. He had to think quickly. His eyes scanned the area around them, and then something caught his attention. A narrow path leading up into the mountains. It wasn't far, but it was their only hope. Follow me, Jacob shouted, grabbing Zerelia's hand and pulling her toward the mountain path. They ran as fast as they could, their footsteps muffled by the dense forest floor. The sounds of the Vordok grew louder, and Jacob's heart pounded in his chest. The ships were getting closer. As they reached the base of the mountain, Jacob looked up. The path twisted up the slope, leading into the rocky terrain. It was steep, but it was their best chance. They would have to climb. Can you make it? Jacob asked, glancing at Zerelia. She nodded, though her face was pale with exhaustion. I'll be fine. Together they began the climb, their hands, gripping the rocks as they made their way up. The air grew thinner as they climbed higher, and Jacob's muscles burned with the effort. But they couldn't stop. Not now. As they neared the top, Jacob heard a distant roar, louder this time. The Vordok ships had arrived. They were close, but just as they reached the summit, Zerelia stopped. She turned to Jacob, her eyes filled, with both fear and determination. Jacob, we can't keep running. Jacob looked at her, panting heavily. We have to keep moving. Zerelia shook her head. No, I can't outrun them anymore, but maybe, just maybe, I can stop them. Jacob's heart sank. What do you mean? She closed her eyes, her breathing slow and steady. I'm going to use the power. But I need you to promise me something. If I lose control, if I become something else, you must stop me. Do you understand? Jacob's face went pale. No, I can't do that. I can't let you... You have to, she interrupted, her voice firm. This power is dangerous, I know it. But if we don't stop the Vordok now, they will destroy everything. You have to promise me, Jacob. Jacob hesitated for a moment, the weight of her words pressing down on him. But he knew she was right. There was no other choice. He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. I promise. Zerelia took a deep breath, and with a final glance at him, she closed her eyes. The air around them began to hum, a low, deep vibration that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. Jacob felt it, felt the power building around her like a storm ready to break. The wind howled through the mountain pass, and Jacob could feel the pressure building around him. The air was thick with the tension of what was about to happen. Zirelia stood still, her eyes closed in concentration, her body glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. The energy she was about to summon was something beyond his understanding. It was raw, ancient power, a power that had once been used to shape the universe. But now it was a force that could either save them or destroy them. Jacob stood a few paces behind her, watching closely. The Vordok were near. He could hear their ships in the distance, the low hum of their engines vibrating through the ground. They weren't far away now. Zirelia had no more time to waste. Her voice broke the silence, soft but steady. "Jacob," she said, her tone serious. "Are you ready?" Jacob swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was about to happen, but he knew this was the only way. They had no other choice. "I'm with you," he said, his voice strong despite the fear in his chest. Zirelia nodded, her eyes still closed. "Remember your promise," she whispered. "If I lose control, you must stop me." Jacob felt his heart race. He didn't know what that meant, how he could possibly stop her if the power consumed her. But he had no other choice but to trust her. He had to believe that they could do this together. The sound of the Vordok ships grew louder. Jacob turned his head, his eyes scanning the horizon. They were coming closer, faster than he had anticipated. Time was running out. He had to make sure that whatever happened, Zirelia's power didn't destroy her, or him. Zirelia's body trembled as the energy within her began to stir. Her hands clenched into fists, and Jacob could see the glow of her power becoming more intense. The air crackled with static, and the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with each breath she took. It was as if the very planet was responding to her. The Vordok ships appeared over the ridge, their dark shapes cutting through the sky. Jacob's eyes widened. There were at least 5 ships, huge, menacing, and bristling with weapons. The Vordok had come for Zirelia, and they wouldn't stop until they had her. They had hunted her across the galaxy, and now they were about to claim their prize. Zirelia's eyes snapped open. They were glowing now, silver and bright, like 2 stars in the night sky. Jacob took a step back, his breath caught in his throat. He had seen her power before, but this was different. It was more intense, more dangerous. The air around her shimmered, and the world seemed to bend in response to her will. Without warning, she raised her arms. A pulse of energy shot into the sky, a brilliant beam that split the clouds above them. Jacob felt the power vibrating in his chest, like a great earthquake rumbling beneath the surface of the earth. He could see the ships above them, now aware of the attack. They began to move into formation, preparing for a counterstrike. Jacob's mind raced. He didn't know what to do. Zirelia was about to unleash something that could destroy them all, destroy everything. He had to act quickly. "Zirelia!" Jacob shouted, his voice rising above the roar of the wind. "Please stop!" But Zirelia didn't respond. She was lost in the power now, her entire being consumed by it. The air around her grew hotter, the ground beneath her feet cracking as if the earth itself couldn't handle the force of what she was doing. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't move. He couldn't. He had promised. He had promised to stop her if she lost control. The first of the Vordok ships fired. The blast hit the ground near Zirelia, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. The force of the explosion knocked Jacob off his feet, but he quickly scrambled to stand. He could see Zirelia, still standing, untouched by the blast. Her eyes were locked on the ships, and she raised her hands again, gathering more energy. The second blast came. This time it was aimed directly at her. Jacob's heart stopped. He didn't know if she could survive another hit, but before the blast could reach her, Zirelia unleashed a wave of energy so powerful that it shook the mountain to its core. The blast from the Vordok ships was deflected, flying off into the distance as if it had never existed. Jacob stared, his mouth open, in shock. He had never seen anything like it before. The energy Zirelia was wielding was unlike anything on Earth. It was beyond anything he could comprehend. But with it came a terrible cost. He could see it in her face. The strain, the pain, the fear. She was holding back something much darker, something that could destroy them all if she wasn't careful. Zirelia cried out, her voice breaking. "I can't control it! Jacob, I can't!" Her body trembled violently and the ground around. Her cracked open, a deep rift forming beneath her feet. Jacob ran to her, his heart racing. "Zirelia!" he shouted, grabbing her by the arm. "You have to stop! You're going too far!" She looked at him, her silver eyes wide with terror. "I can't! I don't know how to stop it! It's too much!" Jacob's mind raced. The power inside her was spiraling out of control, and she was on the edge of losing herself. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it fast. "Zirelia," he said, his voice shaking, "you have to remember who you are. You're not just a weapon. You're more than this. You're not a tool for destruction." Zirelia's eyes flickered, and for a moment, the glow in them dimmed. She gasped, as if she were waking from a trance. "Jacob, I don't want this. I never wanted this." He held her tightly, his heart pounding as he tried to keep her grounded. "Then stop. You don't have to do this. You can control it, Zirelia. You can. You're stronger than this power." For a long moment, Zirelia was silent. The ground beneath them continued to shake, but Jacob could feel the tension in her slowly easing. He held her tighter, whispering words of comfort, trying to anchor her to reality. Finally, Zirelia closed her eyes, and the energy around her began to fade. The ground stopped shaking, and the air grew still once more. Her hands dropped to her sides, and she collapsed into Jacob's arms, exhausted. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I almost lost myself." Jacob gently helped her to the ground, his heart still racing. "You didn't lose yourself. You came back. That's what matters." But even as he said it, Jacob knew the truth. This battle wasn't over. The Vordok were still coming. They were still a threat. And Zirelia, despite her strength, was not invincible. She had just proven that. As the dust settled around them, Jacob stood up, his eyes scanning the horizon. The Vordok ships were still there, hovering above the mountain. They hadn't given up, but neither had he, and neither had Zirelia. "We'll fight them together," Jacob said, his voice filled with determination. Zirelia, still breathing heavily, looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. Something that wasn't just about the power of the Drakari or the Vordok. It was about the connection they shared, the trust, the bond that had been forged through all of this.